Hello everybody, we are here with Jay Elliot. He was one of the principals here at Apple in the 80s, from 1980 to 1986, right?
Yes, right.
He worked with Steve Jobs directly, and we can say he was kind of a mentor for him. But let's start talking about his books, the main reason we are here for. So, the second book has been launched in Italy about 5 days ago.
Right.
So, it is about Steve, and we can start with the main questions.
Mm-hmm.
So, last year we appreciated the Steve Jobs way, which in Italian is l'uomo che ha inventato il futuro. It was fantastic. It was a bestseller, and now you are out with another book. Then you decided, so you decided to write another one. We thought it was completed. From the first one completed the whole world about Steve, and then you decided not to go on.
Right.
So could you imagine so many people could be interested in this book and see Steve from your point of view?
You mean my second book? Or,
yeah. In general.
Yeah, being the only person inside Apple that wrote a book, I felt that I had an insight nobody else had, and I felt it was important for me to get the message out of how things really happened and what you could learn from it. So I wrote the second book more is how to do it. The first book was more of an overview of what happened through the leadership that Steve provided, but the second book was more of a management tips on how to do it. So that's why I wrote the second book.
Yeah. So I've read other books, and I can find some similarities between your book and Reid Hoffman's The Startup of You, which in Italian is Teniamoci in contatto. Do you think Reid Hoffman values embodies Steve's virtues? I mean, you speak in your book about permanent startup vision and about the importance of contacts and values. Did Steve leave just a company or a philosophy of how to manage it?
He left, one of the things that he was very important to him is when he left was he put a team in place and make sure that the philosophy and the values were still there, that when he left that they were when he started. The big advantage was when Scully left, the values we had built before Scully arrived and we had in place when Steve got thrown out, then I got thrown out by Scully shortly thereafter, were still in place. A lot of the reason that Steve was able to take Apple over again and get it going fast is because at the core level of people, the values were still there, and that was very important.
Yeah. So, would we be wrong if we said that Jay Elliot was Steve's mentor?
No, I was older, and as Steve used to always say, you know, when he was 30 years old, he'd say, "No, don't trust anybody over 40." Well, I was over 40, but he always pointed to me, except for Jay. So I was a mentor, and I was a voice of reason, and also I was a voice of criticism. When he did something wrong, I would say, you're doing something wrong. He had an assistant who would call me now and then because they'd say, "Hey, Steve is over in the Lisa group raising hell, would you please go over and get him under control?" And I had this thing, I could walk in a room and Steve would see me and he would change his whole style. He was being sort of a jerk at the time. Before I walked in, I'd walk in and he would see me walk in, he would change his style. So I had this sort of influence on him as almost parental, although I was very open, but I did have a sort of a mentor relationship.
Thank you. So, if we saw Steve as a prequel, and we supposed you learn next door, could we say you learned to help? I mean, after some time, did you start to see things the way he did?
Absolutely. First of all, I had to make a big decision after leaving IBM and so forth to go to work for this young kid. He was only 26 at the time I met him, so I was about 14 years his senior, and I'd been working in a major corporation, and so I had to think about, could I really work for a kid, basically. So that's what the decision. And I saw these virtues in him that I had really wanted in what I wanted IBM to do. That's why I left him, and I really felt he had the virtues and the vision that I felt was what I wanted. So I said, yeah, I think I can. So I did, and he was unique. Everything Steve did, what people don't realize is that everything he did from managing the Macintosh group to being on the board of directors was done with the same quality, intensity that it was all about Apple. So the other thing I was majorly impressed with after being there about a month, I went to a board of directors meeting with him, and he was smarter than most of the board members were. I mean, he was already talking about financial directions and all the plans they had to have, and he was way ahead of them. I actually installed a thing I call a management leadership program. I would bring in CEOs of other corporations, and what I was always amazed at, we go to dinner, when they arrive, we go to dinner and meet people like Lee Iacocca at that time from Chrysler, Robert Crandall from American Airlines, or Fred Smith from Federal Express. These are, you know, solid CEOs of big companies. Steve would dominate the meal. Steve, they'd be more interested in him than he would be in them. And it was just like, because he had this inside understanding of how to run a business to make it successful that they were learning from him. So it was unbelievable.
Yeah, absolutely unbelievable.
Right.
So then, we know Steve left Apple and started a new company, so Next Computer. And then in meanwhile, he also acquired Pixar.
Mm-hmm.
So he also played in the movie field. Then he got back to Apple.
Mm-hmm.
Jay Elliot left Apple and became a TV shows and series producer, if I'm not wrong.
True.
Then he started a new company, invented Amigo,
Right.
and then he started a new one, Nouvelle.
Mm-hmm.
So we can see some similarities between your journeys. How Steve helped you in renewing yourself?
Well, first of all, what I learned working with Steve, I worked with him, not for him. I learned that I really had an intensity inside of me that I didn't really, so I never worked for another corporation since even Apple. I've always been on my own. And that was who I was. I learned working with Steve who I was, and that's important. I think working with him, you sort of learn who you are in that same process. But I never felt I worked for him, and that was a relationship we had. It was, you know, very straightforward, and I don't care who you are, this is the way it's going to be. But I'd also learned a lot of entrepreneurial. I learned the quality aspect. Amigo, as an example, was a product that won every award, and from CES to Newsweek Product of the Year and everything. And actually, it was a flash drive you could carry your computer with you. In fact, it was really the 5 years ahead of mobility, so I was way ahead of where the mobile program. But actually, the form of it was even important to me. And actually, I sat down with a man, had him take a piece of wood and whittle out what I thought the form of the product should be in one significant event. So I felt Apple-like. I felt like I was back to working with Steve. That's what I learned, that this detail was really critical to the future of your product. And so that's why Amigo was so important to me.
Okay. So, are you still a pirate?
Yes.
Yeah, you are. Last year, an Italian writer, Antonio Menno, wrote an interesting book. The title was If Steve Jobs Were Born in Naples, which in Italian is Se Steve Jobs fosse nato a Napoli. He deals with Italian bureaucracy and the possibility to find too many problems when an Italian tries to run his own business. Your last work is about marketing first, and about the way Steve's played his role in renewing marketing. Do you think his vision could be applied to Italian market and other markets in general? What if Apple were born in Naples?
I think, well, it's hard to know the fighting against the system. It's hard to know what the system. The problem with being born in Naples, if you become a Naples person as a child and grow up in the system and you become part of it, then probably no, he couldn't change the world. But Steve was outside the system. Steve was he was an adopted child. He grew up in an environment that as Steve said, if he hadn't formed Apple, he probably ended up in jail because he was totally outside the system. And I'm not sure that a person in Naples can get outside the system, but if they could, which they should, I think that Steve could have been equally. In fact, it's interesting. The real essence of Steve Jobs was an artist. The reason that he's different than all other CEOs in the world, he wasn't a businessman, he was an artist. So he was an artist so think about it, in the environment of Italy, you would think an artist would flourish. So I would assume that if that's true, then that probably he would have done well. I mean, a lot of his insights came from Italy. Olivetti and marble in Florence became the Apple floors in their stores. I mean, so a lot of the influence of Italy. In fact, we looked at one of the Olivetti designers to come over and work for us in Cupertino. We never did it, but so there was a lot of influence, and that's artistic influence. So
yeah.
From that point of view, he probably would have done well.
Oh yeah.
But,
the last but not the least, have you ever been fired?
Yes, I have. I was fired by John Scully, basically what happened was when Steve got thrown out of Apple, I went to John said, "This is wrong, you're making a big mistake," and he said, "No, I'm going to do this, and I can't get along." And I said, "Well, I don't think you're the right guy to run Apple." So I went to the board of directors around him, went to them each individually and said, "You guys are making a big mistake." And I said, "The problem you're doing is you're cutting off the head. I mean, this is a visionary, he's a founder of the company. I can't believe you would do this." And I said, "There's another way to do it." I suggested they move Steve out into a separate company called Macintosh, let Scully deal with the Apple II, that was going to go down, obviously, with old technology. You know, deal with that and let Steve get this going separately, and then bring them back together at the right time. But they chose not to do that. So, and then Scully decided that, obviously, I was against him, so he fired me. And actually, now I won't get into it. I'll do that one.
Okay, thank you so much for your time. It has been a pleasure.
Okay.
We can remind our users that you are presenting this new book, which is Steve Jobs, la storia continua, l'uomo che ha inventato il futuro, è edito da HOEPLI e lo potete trovare in qualsiasi libreria al costo di appena 18 euro, e io che ho avuto la possibilità di leggerlo lo consiglio veramente a tutti. Well, thank you so much. I'm so thrilled about this, so thank you.
Thank you very much. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Take care.
Thank you.